detours along the way. But what matters most is where we end up. And Abraham and Sarah, they finished their journey of faith right where God wanted them to be. And that's what matters most. So tonight we're going to talk about this journey that they took, the journey of faith. And we're going to look at 4 stages of that journey as we look at these verses from Hebrews 11. All right, let's start reading in verse 8. By faith, Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to the place which he would receive as an inheritance. And he went out not knowing where he was going. By faith, he dwelt in the land of promise, as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. For he waited for the city which had foundations, whose builder and maker is God. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past age, 90 years old in fact, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. All right, so I see 4 stages in this journey of faith that's recorded in those verses. And the first stage is that Abraham was called to go out. See that in verse 8? Abraham was called to go out. Now let's go back to Genesis 12 for a moment here, and that's where you find the story of what that phrase is talking about. And we find out that Abraham was born and grew up in a place called Ur of the Chaldees. Ur of the Chaldees. The Chaldean region is what would later become the Babylonian region. We talk about the Babylonians a lot later on in the Old Testament. And it's what we would call today Iraq. And this is where Abraham grew up. Now these were idolatrous people. They didn't worship God. They worshiped heathen gods. Joshua 24:2 tells us even Abraham's family worshipped idols. But somehow in the midst of that wicked, idolatrous place, there's this man named Abraham, or Abram, who loves God, who walks with God the way Noah did, and who is faithful to God. In Genesis 12:1, the Bible tells us when God called Abram, the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you." I never cease to be amazed with this. Abraham is 75 years old at this point. And we have reason to believe he was a very wealthy man. By the way, archaeology has revealed that Ur of the Chaldees was quite a sophisticated place. If you picture Ur of the Chaldees as a bunch of cavemen walking around with clubs, that's not at all the way it was. They had facilities of higher learning. They were experts in math and architecture. They were a quite sophisticated society. There's even evidence of multiple story buildings that were built from this time period. And Abraham was well established in the middle of that. Abraham was a rich man. And at 75 years old, he's probably expecting that he's at this stage of his life where he can sort of slow down a little bit. He's built something up, now he can relax and enjoy it. And at 75, it looks like that's the path that his life is pointed on. Till God enters the picture, right? And that's where that twist comes. Because God has something else in mind. What God has envisioned for the promised land is not Ur of the Chaldees. He has envisioned the land of Canaan to be the promised land. to be the place where eventually the temple would be built and where his people would dwell, where Jesus would enter the world, where he would die for our sins, where he would be raised from the dead, and where he would ascend back to heaven, where the law would go forth as it did on the day of Pentecost. So if God is going to do this through Abraham, he's got to get Abraham out of Ur and get him into the promised land. So he comes to Abraham and he says, I want you to leave your home. I want you to leave your father's house. Okay, God, where are we going? Well, I'll let you know when we get there. Which direction should I go? I'll just point you to the west, and you start traveling, and when you get where I want you, I'll let you know. And there are not many people who would have volunteered for this. But what does Hebrews 11:8 say that Abraham did? He obeyed. You know, one of the things I love about Abraham, when God told him to do something, he immediately got on it. Next week we're going to study about when God commanded him to offer Isaac. And one of my favorite phrases in that whole story is it says, early the next morning. God gave him a command, and early the next morning he got busy about carrying it out. That was his mindset. And this must have been, I can only imagine Abraham trying to explain this to Sarah. We're going to move. Why? We've got everything we need here. All of our family's here. This is all we've ever known. Why are we going to move? God said so. Well, where are we going? I don't know. He hasn't told me yet. I can imagine how easy this could have been to try to explain this to her. But early the next morning, they packed up and they left. Going back to chapter 12, verse 2, God explains what he has in store for Abraham. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So there's several elements of this promise that God made to Abraham. He's going to have a son, first and foremost. And that's a bit of a sticking point with Abram. The name Abram means father. I can only imagine how embarrassing it must have been for him. He would introduce himself to people. Hi, my name is Abram. Oh, father, huh? Well, tell us, how many children do you have? Well, I don't have any children. Well, then later on, God renames him Abraham, which means father of many nations. And again, I can only imagine him introducing himself. My name is Abraham. Excuse me. Father of many nations. So how many children do you have? Well, actually, I don't have any children. This was a point of great frustration for both Abraham and for Sarah. But at 75 years old, God makes this promise. You're going to have a son. That son is going to become a great nation. The nation of Israel. I'm going to bless you. You're going to be prosperous. You're going to be powerful. I'm going to bless those who bless you so that they will be prosperous because of you. And through this nation, a seed will come that will bless all nations of the earth. And of course, we know that that was Jesus Christ, who was a descendant of Abraham. So at 75 years old, Abraham's life is taking this twist. And he's going out into something that is completely unknown. And yet he goes. He journeys 1,000 miles from Ur of the Chaldees to the land of Canaan, trusting if that's where God says he needs to be, then that's where he's going to be. I love to read this story about Abraham. I think we all have at one point or another been in a situation we felt something like Abraham. Facing a moment in life that we're facing something completely new, completely unknown. completely unknown. Like, for example, when you get married, you've never been married before. You don't really know what to expect from that. You're venturing out into something that's completely foreign to you at the moment. When your kids come along, you've never been a parent before. How am I going to manage this? How am I going to deal with this? I think the moment in my life when I felt compelled to preach the gospel, I didn't have a clue whether I could do it or not. I'd never been a preacher before. I didn't know if I really had what it took to do this job and do it well. I know that men who have accepted the role of elder have often felt very overwhelmed by that responsibility, and it is such a responsibility. But they in their heart felt like that's what God needed them to do, and they accepted that responsibility. Even though their lives will never be the same from that point onward, once they have accepted that. They accept it with the conviction, this is what God wants me to do. So this is what I'm going to do. Same thing with accepting the role as a deacon. Same thing the first time someone teaches a class. I've never done this before. So many times in life, we're facing moments where we know what God wants us to do in a situation, but it's somewhere we've never been before. That's okay. That's part of the journey of faith. And part of having the faith that God wants us to have is to take that leap, folks. To say, I don't know where I'm going to land, but I'm going to take the leap believing that God's going to be with me. I'm going to take the leap. I'm going to step out there. That's the journey of faith. Abraham had no clue where he was going, but he believed that God would never lead him astray. So he took the leap. Packed up everything he had, left everything he knew, and started traveling west. And you have to be impressed by that with Abraham. Now, going back to Hebrews 11, verse 8, the next stage of this is where it says, actually verse 9 rather, in verse 9 it says, by faith he dwelt in the land of promise as in a foreign country, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, the heirs with him of the same promise. And he waited for the city which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. So finally he arrives where God wants him to be. He's in the land of Canaan. It's interesting to me the way this passage describes Abraham's time in the promised land, the land of Canaan. Notice, he dwelt there as in what? A foreign country, it says. What kind of dwelling did he have along with Isaac and Jacob after him? What did they live in? Okay, tabernacles or tents. Is that because they couldn't afford anything else? Abraham was a wealthy man. Let me tell you how wealthy Abraham was. There was one occasion Lot got himself in trouble. When Sodom was attacked by this alliance of 5 kings, 5 cities combined to attack Sodom. And in the middle of that, Lot was taken captive. When Abraham heard about it, he gathered together his servants and rode out. And with just Abraham and his servants, he whipped an alliance of 5 cities. That's how massive his whole estate was. He was a very prosperous, very powerful man. So, the fact that he was living in tents says nothing about his means. He could have built the best house in the promised land if that's what he had wanted to do. For that matter, he didn't even own any of the promised land during his entire life. So far as I can tell, the only piece of ground that Abraham ever owned in the Promised Land was the cave that he bought to bury Sarah in. He lived there because that's where God told him to go, but it was like a foreign country, and he was a pilgrim there. And the entire time he was living in tents. Alright? I want to drive this point home right here. The fact that Abraham lived in tents says nothing about his means. It says everything about his attitude. Abraham had a lot of this world's goods, but the world's goods didn't have any of his heart. He wasn't living for this world and what it has to offer. He was looking for something else. And he understood that his journey on this earth is a temporary journey. And ultimately he had his mind somewhere else. He was looking for a city that has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. What is that city? What is the city that has eternal foundations? That's heaven. Heaven. And that's what Abraham was looking for. Go over to Colossians 3 for a moment. Please. Colossians chapter 3. This passage, I think, perfectly describes the tent-dwelling attitude of Abraham. Okay? Verse 1. If then you were raised with Christ, and you were, when you were baptized and you were raised out of that watery grave, you were raised with Christ to walk in newness of life. So if then you were raised with Christ, seek those things which are what? Above. Seek those things which are above, where Christ is, sitting at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things where? Above, not on things of the earth. For you died, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, appears, then you will also appear with him in glory. That's Abraham's tent-dwelling attitude right there. Seeking the things that are above, not the things that are on the earth. So, a sojourner, a pilgrim, that's what Abraham was. All right, now go back to Hebrews 11, please. And look at verse 9 again. By faith he dwelt in the land of promise. Now, dwelt meaning he got there, he stayed there, right? Some people are shaking their head. All right, why are you shaking your head? See, he didn't stay there, did he? At least two occasions. At least two occasions he didn't stay there. Where did he go? He went to Egypt the first time. Why did he go to Egypt? Famine. There was a famine in the land. Did God tell him to go to Egypt? No. All of this is in Genesis, the latter part of Genesis 12. Just after that promise we read about a moment ago. That just after God had said, I'm going to bless you and bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And I'm going to give you this land, and that's where I want you to go. And about as soon as God finished saying that, a famine came, and he split. And he went to Egypt. And that's a whole story, too, about how he lied about Sarah being his sister instead of his wife. Pharaoh almost took her into his own harem. And, boy, everything was in a mess during that time that they were down there in Egypt. But eventually God intervened to spare Sarah from Pharaoh, and as soon as all of that was out in the open, Abraham had what he needed, they got out of Egypt and they got back to the promised land. That was not in the promise. Egypt was not in the promise. Would it be safe to say that that whole trip to Egypt was a detour in the journey of faith? One of the things I love about that, or one of the things that stands out to me about that, I don't really love it, it stands out about that. Immediately before he goes to Egypt, he builds an altar and he worships God. Immediately after he leaves Egypt, he gets back to the promised land, he builds an altar and worships God. You know how many altars he built in between those two? How many altars he built while he was in Egypt? 0. There's not one mention of him calling on the name of the Lord while in Egypt. It wasn't Abraham's best moment. And why did he go to Egypt? Because he was afraid of the famine. He was afraid that he and his family were going to starve in the famine. Was there ever a chance that Abraham and Sarah were going to starve in that famine? Not a chance. Not a chance. God would take care of it. Now, you say, well, it sounds like you're being awful harsh on old Abraham there, Brent. I'm not meaning to be harsh on him, but the only reason I know this is because I know how many times I've taken detours. I know how many times I've been stressed out about some famine of some kind, whatever it may be, whether it's COVID-19 or this or that or whatever it may be. And I know how weak I've been in those moments. I know how many times I've doubted God. Are you still in Hebrews 11? Let me ask you a question. Why does Hebrews 11 not mention Egypt? Later on, Abraham went to Gerar. It doesn't mention that either. Instead, Hebrews 11:9 says that Abraham dwelt in the land of promise. Doesn't say a word about Egypt. Doesn't say a word about Gerar. Why? What's that? Okay, he didn't do those things by faith. He didn't do those things by faith. What might be another reason that it doesn't mention it?
Probably because the towns of Egypt and what else?
Gerar.
Gerar were like losing their population of residents, and it was just dying. So
Well, Egypt was still a thriving place at that time, but that's a good thought. That's a good possibility.
I was assuming Abraham got forgiveness for.
There you go. There's another good reason. What does Hebrews 8:12 says that God does when He forgives something? He forgets it. He remembers it no more. 1 Corinthians 13 says that love does not keep a record of wrongs. And God is love, right? You know why Hebrews 11 doesn't mention Egypt? 1, because He didn't do it by faith. 2, because God already forgot about it. And the only reason I bring it up is because I think it says something about God. And it brings back to this point. Here it is again, okay? You ready? It's all about the final destination. It's all about the final destination. Alright, so Abraham dwelt. Now, the last stage that I want to talk about is in verse 11 and 12. By the way, any comments or questions about what we've talked about so far? Alright. Okay, so now let's focus on Sarah a little bit. Not you. Her eyes got big, so let's focus on Sarah a little bit. Verse 11. By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed. And she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Okay, so God promised this child when Abraham was 75, Sarah was 65. And they must have been thinking when he made that promise, this is bound to happen very soon. See, here I am already 65 years old. Surely this is going to happen in the next year or so, or the next few years. And then those birthdays just kept clicking away, didn't they? Until finally, Abraham was 100 years old and she was 90 years old. Finally, she held Isaac in her arms. He is the child through which the Christ is going to come. He was her own flesh and blood. She named him Laughter. That name has a double meaning. We'll talk about the first one here in a moment, but the second one is how she laughed with joy. A 90-year-old mother holding her newborn baby. And it was such a wonderful moment that only God could have made possible. This is a miracle. Yes.
You reckon why did He waited so long for them to have this child? Was it testing their faith?
Two reasons that I think of. One you just mentioned. Anytime God asks us to wait, it is a test of our faith. And I would say the greatest test of our faith. Because when we want something fixed right now, and it ain't getting fixed right now, that's when our faith is put to its paces in it. So I would say definitely the waiting at any point is a test of faith. Number two, I would say he waited to a point that it would become glaringly obvious that he had brought them this child. Because by the time Sarah could not have children at all until this point. But especially with her being at 90 years old, finally having that child, that no one would ever dispute that that child was a miracle. And that would strengthen their faith too. But here I go again, okay? You see where it says that she judged him faithful? She knew that God could do it. Did she always know that? Some folks are shaking their heads. She didn't, did she? In fact, Abraham too wasn't always so sure. Let's go through a few verses. Let's go back to Genesis 15. Genesis 15, verse 2. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless? You promised me a child, I still don't have one. So what are we going to do? We have to do something to fulfill this promise. He says, the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus, the son of one of his servants. The only person I have to leave this all to is one of my servant's sons. I don't have a son to leave my inheritance to. What are we going to do? And Abram said, look, you have given me no offspring. You said you would. You haven't. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one will come from your own body that shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, look now toward heaven, count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said, so shall your descendants be. And he believed in the Lord. Abraham believed in the Lord. And he accounted it to him for righteousness. Well, I could talk a while on that verse, but we'll have to save that for another time. But you can sense, can't you, the struggle that Abraham's going through with God here. You said I would have a child. I don't have a child. The only person I've got to leave all this to is Eliezer. What's going on here? And God reassures him, I'm going to do exactly what I said I would do. You will have an offspring. And you're not going to leave anything to this other person as your heir. So Abraham had his moments, but Sarah had her moments too. Come down to chapter 16, verse 1. Now Sarah, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. And she had an Egyptian maidservant. See, that trip to Egypt is still getting Abraham in trouble. Still. Nonetheless, whose name was Hagar. So Sarah said to Abram, see now the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please, go into my maid, perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And I don't know that God ever wanted things to be this way, but you know as well as I do that back there in Old Testament times it was not unusual for a man to have multiple wives or for a man to have concubines. And so Sarah's plan here is just marry Hagar and have a child with Hagar, and that will be this promised child. You see where God breathed the word of any of this? He never called on God here, did he? This is not God's plan. This is Sarah's plan. This is plan B. God doesn't have a plan B. He doesn't need a plan B. Now they're sitting here thinking evidently that God has bitten off more than he can chew. That he can't bring them a child. So they need to come up with another plan for this to happen. Well, it did not go well, and it never does. When we try to substitute our own way of doing things for God's way of doing things, I promise you that's not ever going to end well. And it doesn't here. Latter part of verse 2 says, Abram heeded the voice of Sarah, and Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. That would make him about 75. And, 85, and Sarah about 75. And so he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when Sarah saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. What's Sarah's problem here? Just as soon as Hagar gets pregnant, Sarah is overcome with rage. Why? She was jealous. See, when Hagar got pregnant so easily, what became obvious?
It became obvious that Sarah was being cheated.
Okay, well, not cheated on, but it became obvious that Sarah was not able, that she was the one. Abraham could have children. She couldn't. And she thought she could live with this arrangement with Hagar, but when it really happened, she found out she couldn't live with it. It just made her that much more bitter that she couldn't have a child of her own. And I'll tell you, I'm not proud of the way Abraham and Sarah treated Hagar. I don't think there's really any way to justify it. And if this right here is not another detour, I don't really know what to call it. This is not their best moment. Well, let me keep going. Chapter 17, verse 17. God comes back to Abraham. He continues to reassure him of this promise. And it says, Abraham fell on his face and laughed. He said in his heart, shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? What do you notice at the end of that sentence? Question mark. What's the problem with that? Don't put a question mark where God puts a period. Don't doubt what God is capable of doing. Shall a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Yes, if God says so. And shall Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child? Question mark. Yes. And Abram said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live before you. Who is Ishmael? That's Hagar's son. Abraham is still sticking with this substitute. He laughs at what God says he's going to do and says, maybe we should consider just accepting Ishmael. Well, let's keep going. One more passage, chapter 18. This is a little bit later. Now it's getting close to time. They are at the age where they're going to have Isaac. The Lord appears to Abraham, mainly to reveal what he's going to do in Sodom and Gomorrah, but also to reveal what he's going to do in Abraham's family. And let's start in verse 9. They said to him, where is Sarah your wife? And so he said, here in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. Therefore Sarah did what? She laughed within herself, saying, after I have grown old, shall I have pleasure in my Lord being old also. And the Lord brought up the fact that she laughed, and what did she do? No, I didn't laugh. That wasn't me. I'm just coughing. Well, she did laugh. And there was no hiding it. And she laughed not because she was happy or excited. She laughed because she thought it was ridiculous. But it wasn't ridiculous, was it? 9 months later, she had Isaac, and she held him in her arms, and then she laughed for a different reason. She laughed for the right reason. And she named him Isaac, which means laughter. Okay, let's go back to Hebrews 11. And look at verse 11 again. By faith Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age. And she, watch this, judged him faithful who had promised. Why doesn't that verse say anything about her laughing? Why does that verse not mention Hagar or Ishmael or Eliezer? Same two reasons we mentioned a while ago about Egypt, right? Because one, these other things were not done by faith, and two, because God had forgiven it. And once He had forgiven it, He forgot it, and He doesn't keep the record of wrongs. Yes, maybe they had some moments of weakness. Yes, maybe they took some detours. Maybe there were some moments where they were jealous and hateful, and I'm not making light of that. And we should never make excuses for that. I'm not making excuses for them. But what I am trying to drive home is that in the journey of faith, it's all about what? The final destination. It's all about the final destination. Maybe Abraham did go to Egypt, but you know what? When he found out that wasn't where God wanted him, what did he do? He went back where God wanted him. And maybe there were moments when Sarah doubted God, but when she realized how foolish that was to doubt God, what did she do? She trusted God from that point forward. And that's what matters. That's what matters. The same is true for us, because we're all on this journey of faith. And we need to ask ourselves in which direction we are headed right now. Are we going in the direction that God wants us to go, or are we going our own direction? Are we living as if this world is all we have, or are we living as if we are pilgrims and sojourners in this world? Are we doubting God's ability, or are we trusting God's ability? Those are 4 questions for us to ask. And we should not allow any past detours to keep us from reaching the promised land. Let God's Word reroute you, if necessary, tonight, and get you going in the direction He wants you to go. So as we come to close tonight, we're going to extend the invitation. Maybe someone that needs to respond tonight, whether that be to obey the gospel, to come and put on Christ in baptism, or to come seeking the prayers of the church. And it's all about the final destination. Okay? Just remember that. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation when I come now, as we stand.
It is the day of salvation. Tomorrow may be too late. There's danger and death in delaying. Except our saving grace. His life was lost, He has given. Upon our dead today. He's earnestly pleading, oh, make no delay. Tomorrow may be too late. Today is the day of salvation. Tomorrow may be too late. The judgment day, brother, is coming. Prepare ye for that day. His pardon and mercy He offers. Oh, great one yet to make.
Please bow. Our Heavenly Father, we come before you in prayer. Thank you for all the many blessings you have blessed this day with. We're thankful especially for this opportunity we have to gather together on Wednesday nights again. And this time we want to ask that you be with those who are sick, those who are afflicted, those who have lost loved ones. Give them the peace and comfort that they need. And please be with us as we leave this place and make it home safely. And forgive us for our sins as we forgive those sinning against us. Jesus Christ, in that we pray. Amen.